The letter arrived on a Tuesday, 2 months after Robert died. Margaret Collins had been checking the mail every day out of habit. The same way she had done for 43 years. There were 2 bills and a grocery circular. And then there was a plain white envelope with her name written by hand. The return address was somewhere in Tennessee. The sender's name meant nothing to her. David Harmon. She had never heard that name in her life. She brought the mail inside and sat down at the kitchen table. She held the envelope for a moment before opening it. This table was still wrong without Robert across from it. 43 years of meals at this table. And now the chair on the other side was just a chair. She took a breath and opened the envelope. The letter was 2 pages, handwritten on lined paper. The handwriting was uneven, the letters pressing harder in some places and loosening in others. It was the writing of someone who had started over several times. Margaret began to read. It began this way. I know this letter will come as a shock. My name is David Harmon and I am Robert Collins's son. You don't know me. I've never met you. But when I found out Robert had passed, I knew that if I didn't write this letter I would regret it for the rest of my life. Margaret's hand stopped moving. Robert Collins. Her Robert. The man who had died of a heart attack 63 days ago. The man she had been married to for 43 years. She did not put the letter down. She kept reading. I am 51 years old. I met my father twice in my life. The first time I was 9. The second time I was 27. That second time, he told me not to contact him again. He said he had a family and a life he needed to protect. I respected that. I never reached out again. Margaret looked up from the page. The morning light was coming through the kitchen window and lying flat across the table. She sat with it for a moment. Then she looked back down. I don't blame you for any of this. You didn't know I existed. I'm not writing to ask for anything. I just wanted to tell you one thing. My father told me not to contact him. But every month, without fail, he sent money. From when I was a child until I was 40 years old. Not once did it stop. There were no words with it. Just the money. That was his way, I think. That money put food on my table and kept me in school. I never had the chance to thank him. Now I can't. So I'm writing to you instead. The letter ended there. Below his name was a phone number and a small note that said, "Only, no pressure at all, but if you ever wanted to." Margaret set the letter on the table. She did not move for a long time. The refrigerator hummed. A car passed on the street outside. Somewhere a dog was barking. She heard all of it and none of it. 43 years. During all of it, Robert had been sending money to a son she did not know existed. While they were raising their own children, while they were paying off this house, while they were growing old together. His bank account had been sending money to Tennessee every single month. Until the boy turned 40. That was at least 30 years. Margaret did not cry. She had expected to. Instead, she felt a strange stillness. The kind that comes when something is too large to feel all at once. She looked at the letter again. Robert's other son, 51 years old, working somewhere in Tennessee, who had met his father exactly twice. She did not tell her daughter that night. She told herself it was because she needed time to think. The truth was she didn't know how to begin. She put the letter in the drawer of Robert's old nightstand and went to bed. She didn't sleep for most of the night. She called the Social Security office the next morning about an unrelated matter. On the way home from an errand, she found herself driving slower than usual, the way you do when your mind is somewhere else entirely. She thought about the month Robert's father had died, 20 years ago. Robert had been quiet for weeks after. She had asked if he was all right. He had said yes. She had believed him. She had always believed him when he said yes. Because he was a man who kept his word in every visible way. He paid the bills. He showed up. He never raised his voice. He was, by any measure she could see, a steady and decent man. She had not seen everything there was to see. 10 days after the letter arrived, Margaret took it out of the drawer and read it again. David Harmon, 51 years old, 3 years older than her own son. Same father, met Robert twice, told not to come back. And yet he had written this letter just to say thank you to a woman he had never met. Because there was no one else left to say it to. She picked up the phone. It rang 3 times. Then a man's voice answered, low and careful. "Hello," Margaret said, "this is Margaret Collins. "I received your letter." There was a silence on the other end that went on for several seconds. Then, quietly, the man said, "I didn't think you'd call." His voice broke slightly on the last word. This 51-year-old man's voice cracked the way a child's does. Margaret had expected to feel angry. She did feel something that might have been anger. But it was not aimed at David. He had not chosen any of this. He was 9 years old when he first met his father. 27 when he was told to go away. He had spent his life on the receiving end of decisions he had no part in making. The monthly envelope with no return address, no note, no explanation. Just money. That had been his father too. They talked for nearly an hour. Margaret asked most of the questions. David answered carefully and without pressing for anything. His mother had passed 8 years ago, he said. He was married with 2 kids. He worked maintenance at a manufacturing facility outside of Nashville. Robert's money had kept him in school long enough to learn a trade, and the trade had kept him going ever since. Margaret asked if he had been angry at Robert. David was quiet for a moment. "For a long time," he said. "Now I mostly just feel like I missed something. I was never going to have anyway." After she hung up, Margaret sat in the living room until the light changed. The tears came then, slow and without drama. She could not have said exactly what they were for. For Robert, for the life he carried in silence, for this man in Tennessee, who had grown up fatherless by agreement. For herself, maybe, for the marriage she had believed she understood completely. Her daughter came to visit that weekend. Margaret showed her the letter. Her daughter read it twice, set it down, and said, "Did you know anything?" Margaret shook her head. Not a word. They sat together in the kitchen for a long time after that. The way families do when something true has arrived. And there is no instruction for what to do next. Her son took it harder. He did not want to meet David. He said there was nothing to meet. Margaret understood that. She also understood something else. David had not asked for money. He had not threatened anything. He had written 2 pages in uneven handwriting to say thank you to a woman he had never met because his father was gone. And the thank you had nowhere else to go. She met him in the spring, at a quiet coffee shop near her house. David drove up from Nashville. He was a broad-shouldered man with gray at his temples and a way of holding himself that was careful without being stiff. Margaret recognized something in the way he looked at her before sitting down. She had seen that expression before. Robert used to look that way in moments when he did not know if he was welcome. They talked for nearly 2 hours. David did not ask for anything. He told her about his life in simple terms. The way people do when they have learned not to expect much. Near the end, Margaret asked him what he called her. In his head, before she called. He thought about it. "I didn't have a word for you," he said. "You weren't anything I knew how to name." Margaret nodded. She understood that. She didn't have a word for him either. Not a clean one. When they parted outside, David thanked her again for meeting him. She told him she was glad she did. Driving home, she thought about Robert. Not with the sharpness she had felt in those first days. After reading the letter, but with something quieter. Robert had carried this his whole life. Had paid it forward every month in silence, not because it absolved him, but because it was the only gesture he knew how to make. He had been a man who could not say the things that needed saying. He had been a man who showed up in every way except the hardest one. She had known that about him for 43 years, without knowing what it was holding. She did not forgive him that afternoon, but she understood him more completely than she ever had while he was alive. Understanding is not the same as forgiving, but it is sometimes the door. Margaret still hears from David a few times a year. A text at Christmas, a note in the spring. Nothing heavy. Her daughter knows. Her son is still working through it. That is all right. These things take their own time. If a story like this has stayed with you, please subscribe. There are lives like this one everywhere, quietly complicated and rarely told. We will keep telling them. Thank you for listening all the way to the end.